The movie is set in the 1860s. As an aeronaut, Amelia travels in a carriage. During her travels, she has a flashback of her balloon flight with her husband Pierre from 2 years ago. Due to some mishaps, he committed the unthinkable to save her. This memory causes Amelia to have a panic attack. Seeing her sister's condition, Antonia tries to talk Amelia out of the balloon flight venture she's about to embark on. But Amelia is stubborn and says that she just needs a moment. Meanwhile, we see a boy passing behind the sisters. He's seen heading to a large venue where a hot air balloon is about to take flight. It turns out this is where Amelia was heading. At the venue, we see a huge crowd awaiting the launch of the largest balloon ever constructed. The center of the attraction is a young scientist, James Glacier, who impatiently waits as the time for him to take off in the balloon nears. His colleague John warns him not to fly that day because of the dark clouds hovering above them. However, James insists that he has made proper calculations so there won't be bad weather. He adds that he's going to reach a new record of flying the balloon over 26,000 feet. Amelia is set to be the balloon's pilot, while James will be taking scientific readings. As the two arrive, the crowd goes into a frenzy. Amelia knows that ticket sales are the main source of their funding. She is seen in a very colorful circus-like dress while riding the roof of her carriage. Amelia then jumps around the balloon platform, trying to entertain the crowd. She and James greet each other and prepare to take off. Amelia insists on bringing Posey, her Jack Russell Terrier, along with them despite James trying to put his foot down. Although Amelia is unsettled to see a vision of her late husband, she keeps up the brave front and the balloon launches. The spectators cheer with great excitement and joy and wish the pair good luck. In the next scene, the two slowly ascend into the sky in the hot air balloon. Amelia climbs above the ropes to put on a show. She asks James to pass her Posey, and when he does, she shocks him and the crowd below by throwing the dog out of the balloon. Thankfully, Posey is wearing a parachute and lands safely. This brings up much hype among the crowd. As they admire the breathtaking view of London, James takes out his binoculars and watches the building of the Royal Society, remembering how all of this started. The scene cuts to a flashback. He and his colleague John reach the top of a building as they watch a balloon take off far in the sky. Next, James appears before the Royal Society, asking for funding so he can go on a similar expedition. He explains his theory that the weather can be predicted. However, James's ideas are seen as absurd, and his fellow scientists mock him badly. Devastated, James returns home to his parents. They want him to choose another field of science. Back in the present, Amelia changes into warmer clothes, while James releases the first of 5 pigeons carrying messages stating the current altitude along with other scientific readings in case they don't survive. Like John, Amelia worries about the dark clouds as they rise through a layer. James continues to insist his predictions are correct, but soon they're proven to be wrong. In the next scene, they run into a violent storm of lightning and wind, which sends the balloon spinning as the two attempt to make it through the rough weather. During the struggle, James hits his head on the basket, causing it to bleed. The wind suddenly gives the balloon a particularly hard shake, causing the pair to be pushed out of the basket. They manage to hold on to the hoop, but the wind hits them again. James is thrown back to the basket, while Amelia remains hanging onto one of the ropes. But despite this, James somehow helps her to get inside the balloon, and they begin throwing out sandbags. This makes the balloon go higher, and they eventually leave the clouds behind. Moments after, they see a clear sky as they are warmly touched by sunlight. While James begins taking notes, Amelia is still haunted by her husband's death. During this time, the movie cuts to another flashback. Sometime following the death of her husband, Amelia is moping when her sister Antonia persuades her to attend a social function. There, she meets James for the first time. The scientist claims that he's attending with a friend who wishes to court a wealthy woman. Amelia is very put off by his quirky nature, but dances with him to ignore a suitor who wishes to approach her. As the two dance, James asks if she would be willing to pilot his balloon in a privately funded expedition while he attempts to prove his theories. Amelia realizes that he's not there with a friend, but attended the function simply to meet her. She is angry, but is persuaded by him to agree. Days later, as she starts working on the balloon, Amelia is confronted by her sister Antonia, who calls out her sister. Antonia comments that Amelia is only running away from her problems, and that the happiness she found while flying had come from her late husband, not from the balloon. Antonia then suggests she try a much more conventional career path. At present, Amelia tends to James's head injury, and he asks her about her husband, but Amelia changes the subject. As time passes, James and Amelia start getting to know each other better and start enjoying each other's company a lot more, with James becoming less concerned with scientific readings and starting to enjoy the experience from a personal point of view. Amelia, however, refuses to discuss the death of her husband, who also used to be an aeronaut. They also discover an air current that is home to a group of butterflies, confirming a theory of James's colleague John, that insects can travel on air currents. Touched by the gorgeous moment, Amelia tells James about her husband's love for the beauty of the world, and with tears in her eyes, thanks him for not pushing her to talk about it. We learn that when Amelia and Pierre were on a balloon flight, something went wrong and they needed to lose weight quickly. They throw everything else overboard, hoping to reduce the weight, but it doesn't work. Pierre then sacrificed himself to save his wife by jumping off the balloon to his death. Since then, Amelia has been blaming herself for her husband's untimely death. Back in the present, the temperature begins decreasing as James and Amelia ascend further in the sky. Little by little, they seem to go higher and celebrate when they see them finally surpass the altitude the French had achieved, which is 23,000 feet. They are now the people who had flown the highest in the history of humanity. As the temperature continues dropping, Amelia finds out James didn't bring any clothing suitable for coping with the rapidly decreasing temperature and decides to start descending. However, James refuses, giving her a speech about the importance of what they're doing and showing her how beautiful the starry sky is. Amelia realizes she does find happiness in flying, not just in her husband. Eventually, she agrees to keep rising, but under the condition that he accepts, they'll have to start descending soon. James agrees, so she throws out another bag of sand. In a flashback, as James practices for the flight, Amelia visits to tell him she's changed her mind to pilot the balloon. He's horrified, as money has already been spent preparing for it, but she is unmoved and leaves. Following this, John goes to see Amelia that night to speak up for James. He attempts to convince her, saying that she has an obligation to advance the cause of science. He shows her a book containing James's findings when studying snowflakes, and tells her how much the flight means to him. Amelia then goes to her husband's grave to reflect. When it begins to snow, which John told her James had predicted, she decides to go with him after all. Back in the present, the temperature is now below freezing. The balloon, along with James and Amelia, is covered in frost. The scientist releases another pigeon, but it falls as soon as it tries to fly. James tries to get another to fly, but sadly, it has been frozen to death. Now nobody will know their location if something happens, so James begins freaking out. Amelia demands that the balloon starts descending. By now, James starts experiencing hypoxia from the altitude, causing his nose to bleed. But he insists they continue and tries to stop Amelia from descending. James is now going slightly mad from the cold and begins throwing equipment and sandbags overboard to speed up their ascent. The two get into a scuffle, and James reveals he wants to risk his life for science, like how Amelia's husband did. The aeronaut is furious, so she slaps him. He relents only when Amelia tells him the real story of how her husband sacrificed himself to save her during a balloon flight. At that time, Amelia had pushed the balloon too hard, which ripped the seams apart. No matter how many things they threw out, they couldn't make the descent, so her husband jumped off the balloon in order to save her. After hearing Amelia's story, James comes to his senses and apologizes to her. He then agrees to start descending. Unfortunately, it's easier said than done, as the air release valve on top of the balloon is frozen. As James falls unconscious from the cold, Amelia has no choice but to climb on the outside of the balloon and open the valve from the outside. However, this becomes a tough task for her as she begins to suffer from severe frostbite in one of her hands. After bravely struggling for a while, she makes it to the top and manages to kick open the air release slightly, and the balloon begins slowly descending. But by now, Amelia is very tired and consumed by the frostbite that she loses consciousness and starts rolling down the balloon. When she wakes up, she's hanging upside down over the side by a rope she'd tied to herself. Quickly realizing her situation, she manages to swing back to the balloon and tries desperately to wake James up. For a few seconds, it seems like he has died, and Amelia begins mourning. Thankfully, he regains consciousness and they start to enjoy the descent. In the next scene, we see snow falling around them. However, when the snow starts to hover in front of them, they realize they're not descending as quickly as they should be, and the balloon has started to collapse. They quickly manage to get the air release opened fully. But this still isn't enough to get the balloon down fast enough, so they start throwing everything over the side while James makes sure to save his records. When this also doesn't work, the two resort to climbing onto the framework and releasing the carrying basket of the balloon. Amelia realizes they're going to end up dead like her husband, so she decides to save James. Realizing that Amelia is ready to sacrifice herself to save him, James is able to convert the rest of the balloon into a parachute, which slows their descent, but not completely. The two hit trees as they near the ground, and James disappears, while Amelia hits the ground hard and is dragged several feet before stopping. Next, Amelia wakes up and starts calling for James, who wobbles towards her. Both are severely injured, but euphoric that they managed to survive and set a new human flight altitude record of 37,000 feet. Battered but unbeaten, the two help each other to their feet and stumble toward help. A voiceover by Amelia states that James's findings eventually proved the existence of layers in the atmosphere, paving the way for the first weather forecasts. At the same time, we see James giving another speech to the Royal Society, and he and his field are finally accepted, with James earning huge applause from his fellows. The film ends with James and Amelia going on another balloon flight together.